with me if you want to live. You just don't turn it off!
Hard Times was released in 1975, directed by Walter Hill, starring Charles Bronson, James Coburn, and Jill Ireland. Hard Times tells the saga of a drifter who turns to illegal bare-knuckle boxing in the Depression era of New Orleans. What's going on, everyone? My name is Jason. You're watching Backtrack Cinema, and welcome to my review of Hard Times. Now, another Charles Bronson review, as we're really in the swing of Charles Bronson month now, and this is definitely not the first watch. I have loved this movie ever since I was a teenager when my dad showed it to me. We had a copy on VHS, and just loved it. As a teenager, I loved fighting movies, and put Charles Bronson in a bare-knuckled, fighting movie in the Depression era was just awesome. And I just loved the fight scenes and everything. I see that there's a lot more to the movie than just fighting, but still a great Sunday afternoon watch, you know what I mean? And the real surprising thing about this movie, I mean, every time I watch, I'm like, wow, the movie's only an hour and 33 minutes. But I'm telling you guys right now, it feels like a 2-hour movie. Now, that could be this because, the mid-70s and everything, the pacing's a little slower back then. They got to things a lot slower, depending on what you watched. If you have an issue with movies dragging a bit, you may have an issue with the pacing with this movie, but I don't have a problem with that because I'm pretty attached to the characters in this. I think everything's pretty entertaining. And this is really a ballad. This is a saga. As Walter Hill described it, the director, it's like this is something, a tale you'd hear around the campfire. For me, it's almost like if it's your great-grandfather is telling you this story from the past. And I think the pacing and everything along with this movie works because of that. Charles Bronson rolls in this town, hops off on a train. It's like 1933, I believe. He's a very quiet, mysterious character. You just see him at a diner, reading the paper, drinking some coffee and stuff like that. And he sees all these people gathering around. He finds out there's these underground fights happening. We find out that he is one hell of a fighter and he wants to get in on the action of these fights. So he goes to James Coburn. James Coburn is kind of like who sets up these fights, but this guy has a huge gambling addiction. And so he loses more than he ever earns, but they, form this partnership, and Charles Bronson wants to make as much money as he possibly can and just leave at the end. So it's basically a stranger arrives, makes his money, we get to know him a little bit, leaves at the end. It's like it's a tale. It's a ballad, you know what I mean? It's like something you'd hear from a song, you know what I mean? He plays a guy named Chaney, the Ballad of Chaney, almost like that. So you got to look at it kind of like that. You look at it from that perspective, and that's what kind of like Walter Hill was going with. Because when you see the locations and everything feels like it's from the Depression. There's buildings are falling down, everything looks rough, you know what I mean? Charles Bronson was in his 50s at this time. So, they wanted a younger character, actually a younger actor. Charles Bronson just really fit the role, you know what I mean? There's one scene at the end fight where Charles Bronson, you could tell, is just gassed, right? And that's because he was a heavy smoker. And Walter Hill said he was after 40 seconds he was just gassed, you know what I mean? So it's kind of funny, but yeah, it's a good movie. A lot of our characters in here, they're just people, trying to survive, trying to scrape by any way they can. Charles Bronson meets a woman, Jill Ireland, who plays this woman he starts, courting kind of, and, walks her home and stuff. They go on some dates, they go out for drinks. But Charles Bronson's kind of guy who comes and goes as he pleases, and she wants kind of more out of him and stuff like that. And where it's going. This guy's gonna have his final fight and he's gonna leave at the end of it. But I quite like Jill Ireland as an actress. I've always liked her. I think she was drop dead gorgeous. She was Charles Bronson's wife too. Died way too young. So rest in peace, Jill Ireland. She died of cancer when she was like 54 in 1990. So I think she's pretty good in this. Walter Hill wasn't big on her performance. He thought she could have been stronger, but I quite liked her in this. And then we got James Coburn, who's excellent in this movie. He's the one setting up the fights for Charles Bronson. James Coburn's really wired. He's really hyper in this movie. They call him Speedy, and he just loses all the money these guys make together, like him and Charles Bronson make together. I mean, to give you an idea, by the end of it, he was flat broke. Charles Bronson has $5,000 left. $5,000. To give you some context, in 1933, it'd be like $75,000 now to today's standards. So this is big money they're dealing with, and this guy just gambled it all away. And Charles Bronson has to face this moral dilemma. Does he get Speedy out of trouble because Charles Bronson was just gonna leave and say no, he got his self in debt, that's his problem? Or does Charles Bronson take this one last fight to help a friend? Even though, what if he really gets hurt because he's supposed to be facing this lethal opponent and everything like that. Charles Bronson does the right thing, saves his friend, they make the money, and off into the sunset he goes. Walter Hill through this whole movie is allowing you to think for yourself. He's showing a lot. He shows you everything that's going on. He never once tells you anything. You know what I mean? You just pick up everything as you're watching it. And if we can go back to Charles Bronson's character, because he's so mysterious, he's had some kind of a shaky past. Maybe, I don't know, maybe he learned to fight in World War One. You know what I mean? Maybe he there is a dark past to him, and we don't need to know that though. You know what I mean? We just know he wants to make his money and then he wants to leave, kind of thing. And it's just, we all like mysterious characters, right? And he's got that quiet toughness, like I've been saying a lot of these reviews. He's that quiet toughness, that mystery to his character because he's so bloody quiet, right? He always reminded me of my grandfather, Charles Bronson. My grandfather was just this quiet guy. You know what I mean? He'd stare off and really quiet, and he was tough too. So Charles Bronson would have grew up as a kid, I believe, in the Depression era. I think like Charles Bronson himself would have been 10 years old during all this, when all this story would have been, this situation or whatever, if it wasn't real life, would have happened, right? So it was a perfect movie for him. You can see Walter Hill playing with the idea of the two opposites. You know what I mean? Like almost the buddy cop kind of thing. What he did in 48 Hours, Crossroads with Ralph Macchio and Joe Seneca, that duo, that kind of funny, entertaining duo. You kind of see it with Chaney, Charles Bronson's character, and James Coburn, Speedy. You kind of see it a bit. You see how, I think this was Walter Hill's first movie, so you see how he likes doing that with his characters. These two people who like complete opposites. Charles Bronson's quiet, this guy is loud and almost obnoxious at times, and you see that throughout the guy's career when he did 40 Hours with Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy, or he did, like I already said, Crossroads, Bullet to the Head recently with Sylvester Stallone and I forget the actor's name, but you know what I mean? It's kind of a buddy cop kind of thing. I think Walter Hill's just the kind of director who does pretty well in these kind of movies. He really is a cult classic kind of director, if you ask me. Like Crossroads is a freaking cult classic. Streets of Fire is a cult classic. You could say Hard Times is a cult classic. And the fighting's really great. There's a lot of you, it may be dated now. And even for back in those times, in 1975, maybe there was a little bit of restraint to it. Maybe it could have been more bloody. It could have been more violent and vicious. But with these fighters in this movie, it's all an honor code. It's all the people betting on them, all the people shouting, and the crowd that are the real animals. You know what I mean? These fighters are actually in this movie have an honor code where they don't hit each other when they're down. They wait for the guy to get up before they fight again. And when the guy's out, he's out. When he's had enough, he's had enough. So it's a they're really realistic kind of fit. The old, like this, they're fighting like this, they're moving like this. It's really awesome. And we see how, how fast, how strong Charles Bronson is and how he takes people out pretty easily. In the end, fight's pretty good, but there's a fight he has with the skinhead kind of guy that's really good. He's supposed to be the top dog, and this is where they get ripped off and everything at this function where Charles Bronson lays this guy out. I've always liked the fights in this because this seemed gritty, real, and tough. Something about the old boys from those actors back then, where they just really personified a man, right? That real tough, cold steel man. You know what I mean? And you seeing these guys just go at it, I think is great. Music's really good too. It has some beautiful acoustic guitar music at the beginning of it. It really setting the tone of the movie, the era of the movie. So I think the music's beautiful in this, man. Very underrated score. Very underrated score, I think, in this movie. I think the guitar playing in it, you hear some really nice folky kind of guitar playing that's just great. Really like it. But for me, Hard Times is a very good Charles Bronson movie. Probably one of my favorites. We'll see when we do a ranking. So I'm going to give Hard Times from 1975 a solid B. But what about you guys? Let me know. Have you seen Hard Times? If you haven't, go watch it. Come back, then watch this review. We'll have a great discussion in those comments. Please comment below if you've seen it, what you think of it. Let's talk about this movie as we always do in the comments. There's your next video to watch. Please go down the rabbit hole. As always, my name is Jason. You're watching Backtrack Cinema. I'll see you next time, and I'll see you in the movies. Cheers.